I was about 4 when this happened, so most of it comes from what my mom and grandpa told me. We had just moved into this little one-story house on a quiet street. Nothing special, just an older suburban place with narrow hallways, carpets that always looked kind of dirty no matter how much you cleaned them, and thin walls where every little creak felt louder than it should have been. The place always felt a little off. The backyard was fenced, but the gate never latched properly. There was a sliding glass door at the back that rattled if the wind blew hard, and a tiny laundry window Mom kept open for the cat. The house had this long hallway that connected all the bedrooms. If you stood in the living room, you could see straight down to the bathroom at the very end. That hallway always seemed darker than the rest of the house, even during the day. One afternoon, Mom and Grandpa took me grocery shopping. When we came home, everything looked normal. Grandpa unlocked the front door, we stepped inside, and then, slam. One of the bedroom doors down the hall shut hard, loud enough to make Mom jump. It was too forceful to be just a draft. Grandpa didn't even hesitate. He rushed down the hall and into the bathroom. The window was wide open, curtains blowing in the breeze. The room was empty. Whoever it was had slipped out just seconds before. Nothing in the house was touched, nothing taken, but it was clear someone had been inside. That night, Mom kept reassuring herself it was only bad timing, just a would-be thief who had panicked and fled. Even so, she lay awake for hours, staring down the hallway with every sound in the house amplified in her mind. It was around 3 in the morning. Mom woke up, but not from a sound. She just opened her eyes, and there he was. A man sitting on the edge of her bed. In his hand was one of her kitchen knives. She said she froze, solid. Couldn't scream, couldn't move. He was mumbling something, low and garbled, like he was talking to himself. She couldn't make out a single word. Then the neighbor's dog barked, just once, sharp and loud. The man stood up completely calm and walked out of her room. She heard the sliding glass door open, then close. For a moment, it was quiet. Then the glow of the streetlight through the curtains dimmed like someone was standing outside the window. Then it was gone. She managed to grab the phone and dial my grandfather. All she said was, "There's someone in the house." 5 minutes later, my grandpa and her 3 teenage brothers screeched into the driveway. No shoes, no shirts, just underwear. They split up and circled the house. Every door was unlocked. The back door stood wide open. Whoever it was had slipped away. The next morning, Mom noticed muddy footprints in the laundry room under the small window she always left cracked open for the cat. That was the entry point, but the more they looked, the stranger it got. The man hadn't come just to steal. He'd lingered. He fed the cat and poured milk into a bowl. He'd poured himself a whiskey from the decanter in the living room, added ice and Coke, and left the glass sitting there. In the fridge, some of the leftover roast was missing, but when they checked the eggs, someone had injected solder into them, like he'd deliberately ruined the food. In the laundry basket, Mom found her black negligee shredded into ribbons. On the kitchen counter, he'd cut up random catalogs with scissors, leaving the pieces scattered. The worst part? On the camera near my bed were 2 new photos, one of the stovetop and another of me, asleep. He'd been standing in my room, right next to me, close enough to take a picture. He left the camera on the nightstand, as if on purpose. There were fingerprints everywhere, on the fridge, on the glass, even on the sliding door. The police came, dusted, and collected, but nothing matched anyone in the system. No hits. The cops said he must have been someone who knew the family, someone who knew the house well enough to slip in and move around quietly. The theory that floated around years later was that it might have been an acquaintance of one of her brothers. Nothing was ever confirmed, just whispers. This person told that person, who passed it on to someone else. Eventually, the name of a guy did come up, and years later, he ended up in psychiatric care for something unrelated. But he was never charged. Mom never really got over it. She lived with that fear for years, that someone could be sitting on her bed, inches away, holding a knife. When she remarried, my stepdad had a monitored alarm system installed, and that helped. But the story never left her. It was a Friday night, a little after 1 in the morning. My girlfriend and I had fallen into that lazy late-night mood where you're too tired to do anything but not quite ready to sleep. We were lying on the couch with blankets, scrolling through movies until we finally settled on The Village. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the TV. The neighborhood was the same. No cars driving by, no sounds outside, just that silence you only notice when you realize how late it is. We lived in a small, single-story place. Not fancy, but it was comfortable. The back door led into the kitchen, and the kitchen had these old blinds that never really closed all the way. You could always catch little glimpses of the yard if you were at the right angle. I'd never really thought about that until that night. The movie had just gotten past one of its jump scares, so we were already a little jumpy. Out of nowhere, I caught this sharp flicker in my peripheral vision, like a flashlight beam cutting through the dark, turning on for just a second, and then gone. A split second later, I heard our back door shut. Not a slam, not the wind, just a clean, deliberate click. I looked over at my girlfriend. She was already staring at me, wide-eyed. She gave me the tiniest nod, like, yeah, I heard that too. I felt my stomach sink. I got up slowly, trying not to make any noise, and headed for the kitchen. The only light back there came from the glow of the TV behind me, spilling weakly into the room and warping shadows against the walls. Everything felt off, too quiet, too still. I crept past the fridge, trying to peek around it, and froze. In the corner behind our dining table, someone was standing. It was unmistakably a human shape, tall, thin, just standing there in the corner behind the dining table, completely still, not moving and not making a sound. My chest tightened. I couldn't move. I just stood there, locked in place, staring. My brain scrambled for some explanation. Maybe it was a coat rack, maybe a shadow, but it wasn't. I finally tore my eyes away, glancing back toward the living room to see if my girlfriend had followed me in. She hadn't. When I turned my head back toward the corner, I nearly choked. The figure had turned, and it was facing me now. I could see the outline clearly in the dim light, and worse, I could see two faint, dull eyes. They were staring straight at me. I didn't think. I screamed and bolted back into the lounge and yanked my girlfriend off the couch. I dragged her into the bedroom, slammed the door shut, locked it, and pulled us both down behind the bed. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought the thing could hear it. She kept whispering, "What's going on?" And I just kept hissing at her to be quiet. For 10 straight minutes, we sat there listening. Every sound in the house felt magnified. The creaks, the TV hum, even my own breathing. But there was nothing that sounded like footsteps, nothing that sounded like someone moving around. Finally, with shaking hands, I dialed 911. My voice cracked as I told them someone had broken into our house, that I'd seen him, that I didn't know if he was armed. They said officers were on the way. About 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door. My bedroom door was right across the hall from it, so I figured it had to be them. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand, counted to 3, and we sprinted out together straight through the front door. But there was nobody there. There were no flashing light. There weren't any cars. It was just the empty street. The neighborhood was dead quiet. We stood there shivering in the night air, calling out and waiting for someone to answer. There was no answer. I panicked and dragged us back inside, locking the door again. We stayed barricaded in the bedroom until nearly an hour later, until when the real cops finally showed up. They shouted from the door until we opened it. They searched the entire house, every room, every closet. They found nothing. There was no forced entry, no footprints, no sign anyone had been there at all. One of them suggested maybe we got spooked by the movie. maybe saw a shadow or something. But I know what I saw. There was someone standing in that corner, staring at me in the dark, and to this day, I still don't have an explanation for it. I was in 7th or 8th grade when this happened. My parents had this circle of friends who got together every week to eat and play cards. They rotated houses, and sometimes it went late into the night. I usually went with them, but that evening I stayed home. I was still recovering from the flu, too weak to really do much, so I camped out on the couch in the living room with a book. Before leaving, I asked my mom to close one set of curtains because the sun was glaring in my eyes. She pulled them shut and left the others open. I didn't think twice about it. Later, that turned out to matter more than anything. The house was quiet after they left. The late afternoon sun poured through the windows, filling the room with warmth. My cat, Whiskers, was stretched across the back of a chair, half asleep in a sunbeam. My old dog, Julie, was stretched out on the rug, soaking up another warm patch. Everything felt calm. I was sick, but it was peaceful, almost comforting. At some point, I must have drifted off. I woke up because Whiskers was hissing. Julie was standing stiff and growling. Not her usual growl either. This was a low rumble that kept going even while she breathed in. Her whole body was tense, her hackles raised. She was planted in front of me, facing the front door. That's when I saw the doorknob turning, slow and deliberate. The deadbolt above it was locked, thankfully. At first I was groggy and not processing what I was seeing, but then I heard footsteps crunching across the porch. Whoever it was moved to the side of the house. You could hear the grit or sand on their shoes as they walked. They stopped at the kitchen window. By then, it was dark outside. The lamp I'd been reading under was still on, and I realized the worst possible thing. I was sitting under the only light in the house with all the curtains wide open. I might as well have been sitting on a stage. Anyone outside had a clear view of me. I was in my nightgown, and my robe had come loose while I was lying down. Before the person reached the window, I slid off the couch and flattened myself against the side of it. Our coffee table was an old cedar chest, so I pulled my legs up tight so I couldn't be seen through the glass. Julie was barking now, launching herself at the window, teeth bared. Whiskers bolted and vanished under something. I realized I couldn't stay there. If he moved to the next window, I'd be in full view. I forced myself up even though I was dizzy from the flu and the sudden rush of fear. I moved along the wall toward the curtain my mom had closed earlier. At one point, I was right beneath a window as the man leaned in. I saw the shape of his shoulders, the height of him. Definitely a man, no question. I reached the phone and picked it up. The line was dead. He had cut the line. My stomach dropped. Almost immediately after, I heard the back door. The knob rattled, glass shaking in the frame. That door had a window in it, and I knew if he broke the glass, he could reach inside. For a second, I froze, completely panicked. Then I remembered my stepdad had a separate phone line in his office at the far end of the house. I got up and ran for it. Julie was right with me, barking like she was ready to tear someone apart. We made it to the office. I locked the door and grabbed the phone. It worked. I called my parents. My stepdad picked up, but I was so hysterical that I couldn't explain myself over the sound of Julie barking. Finally, I just screamed, "Someone is breaking in. Come now." I crawled under his desk and pulled the phone down with me. I curled up against the wall, trying to stay out of sight of the window. Julie followed and stood right over me. She went silent. Her hackles were raised, lips peeled back over her teeth, but no barking. She knew not to give away our position. It felt like forever, but it was only a few minutes before I heard a siren. The card group included a couple of deputies, and they came with my dad. Two went around the outside, while my dad and one deputy came in and found me under the desk. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even stand. The back door window had been broken out. There was blood on the glass where the guy had cut himself reaching in. He managed to get the knob unlocked, but couldn't get past the deadbolt. That deadbolt required a key from both sides. That was the only thing that stopped him. They caught him the next day. He had gone to a doctor for stitches and matched the description. I ended up sick again from the stress. I also remember being freezing in the office because that room didn't have heat. Sitting there shaking, cold from both fear and the air, waiting for someone to come. I did eventually stay home alone again. I refused to let him take that from me. But I never sat in front of an uncovered window after dark. And even now, I still check locks twice. I still draw curtains tight before the sun goes down. Because once you've felt what it's like to be hunted in your own home, you never really forget. I was 7. My sibling was 15. Grounded for something that didn't matter. Something stupid. The kind of rule that changes depending on which parent is in a bad mood. All I remember is the phones were locked away, my siblings and the house phone, both sealed in my dad's gun safe. We didn't know the combination. We lived in a quiet town in Ohio. So small, it made our mom's graduating class back in the city look like a stadium crowd. Everyone knew everyone. Nothing happened. That's why we moved there. Safer, quieter, a better place to raise kids. That night, our parents said they were going a few houses down to check on our great-grandmother. My grandparents were out of town, and she lived in this tiny house they'd built for her on the property, so she could still be independent. Just a quick visit, then back home. They promised we'd order pizza afterward. My sibling and I played video games for a while. I sat on the floor, he laid belly down on the couch, grumbling every time I messed up or moved too slowly. We argued a little, laughed more, then fell into that easy rhythm siblings sometimes do when no adults are around. After a couple of hours, we were starting to get hungry. The kind of hunger where you start peeking into the fridge, even though you already know it's empty. Then came the knock. I perked up immediately, excited. I figured it was pizza, or maybe our parents back already. I ran downstairs to the door, and my sibling called out from behind, "Don't open it till you see who it is." The front door was one of those old wooden ones with a long, narrow pane of glass running down the center. Not the safest, but common around here. I pressed my nose to the window and stopped. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't the pizza guy either. It was a man. He looked about mid-20s, very tall, very pale. Not ghostly, just like someone who didn't go out in the sun much. He had short black hair, maybe a little greasy, and patchy scruff along his jaw, like he'd forgotten to shave. His clothes weren't strange, jeans, hoodie, but there was something off about the way he stood. He didn't wave, didn't knock again, just stood there, and I didn't know him. In a town where you know everybody, that's the kind of thing that makes your stomach drop. I lifted my hand, held up a finger, 1 second, and turned to call for my sibling. The curtain dropped, and the knocking started again. By the time my sibling came around the corner, the knocks had turned to pounding. Then the doorknob started shaking, jerking back and forth, trying to open. Neither of us spoke. My sibling just grabbed my wrist and ran into the kitchen. The footsteps were so fast and loud on the tile, it sounded like thunder. My sibling reached for a kitchen knife. I'll never forget the sound. The first one snapped. It broke clean in his hand. Cheap plastic handle, too much force. He swore under his breath and grabbed another. This one didn't break. We crouched in the laundry room at the back of the house, lights off, huddled between the dryer and a shelf full of cleaning supplies, and we waited. The banging kept going. The handle kept rattling. It went on for minutes. And if you've ever been that scared, you know minutes feel like hours. We didn't move. My sibling held the knife and wrapped his arm around me, trying not to breathe too loud. And then, silence. I remember the feeling in my stomach. Not a twist, more like a drag, like something was slowly pulling my insides down through the floor. Then, the front door opened. No crash, no smash, just a click, like someone who had a key. And then, footsteps, soft, steady, walking through the front of the house. One step, two, across the hardwood. Carpet muffled the rest. One thing about my sibling is, he have always been ready to protect me at a moment's notice. My sibling tensed beside me. I could feel it in his breath. He raised the knife and whispered, "If he comes in here, you run. Do you hear me? Run and don't stop." But I didn't want to run. I didn't want to move. The footsteps came closer, and then, "Why are you guys in here?" It was Mom. We both shot up like we'd been shocked, ran straight into the kitchen, tears already falling, barely understanding what was happening. She was holding 2 pizza boxes, staring at us like we were the weird ones. Outside, through the front window, we saw Dad talking to the man. He was still there. I think we both started yelling at the same time, telling her about the knocking, the handle, the pounding, the way he tried to get in. But Mom just laughed, just amused. "He's a mechanic," she said. "He was asking about the broken car in the driveway. There was no for sale sign on that car, no light outside to highlight it, no way to know anyone was home except for a child's face in the window." She hugged us, promised they wouldn't lock the phones away again while they were gone, and we ate our pizza. We cried a little while we chewed. That was the end of it. But now, years later, it still bothers me. As an adult, I know how adults behave. I know how people knock. I know that if you see a child answer the door alone, you don't start pounding harder. You don't rattle the knob. You don't try to get in. And I wonder what would have happened if Mom hadn't appeared. What would have happened if she'd been 5 minutes late? If he'd gotten inside? And whatever his reason for being there, it wasn't about the car. It was about the house. It was about who was inside. It was about how long we'd be alone. It was a regular Thursday night, quiet, forgettable, the kind of night that vanishes into memory. I was 14, babysitting my little cousin at his house while our parents were out, just the 2 of us. He was 6, watching some cartoon rerun while I half paid attention, flipping through my phone. But something didn't feel right. You know that feeling, when the air changes. The room felt thicker, like the shadows were a bit too dark. The quiet got a little too deep. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me. I stood up, stretched, and made an excuse to check the back door. It was locked, but the feeling stayed. Then something pulled my eyes toward the window, and then I saw him, in the kitchen window. A man. Gaunt, with skin like crumpled newspaper. His eyes were sunken, glassy, wrong. He looked like he had crawled out of a ditch or a grave. His face didn't move, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at my cousin, smiling. I didn't scream. I didn't let on. I swallowed every instinct and turned to my cousin, keeping my voice light. "Hey, bud, let's go upstairs. It's almost bedtime, but it's not late. Your mom and mine will be mad if we're still up. Let's go." I led him up the stairs, step by step, slowly, steadily. I didn't look back. I couldn't, so I kept walking, one step at a time, pretending everything was normal while my skin crawled with every breath. I tucked my cousin into bed like it was any other night. kissed his forehead, told him to stay under the blanket and not to get up, no matter what. Then I went back down, and he was gone. I crept to the front door, locked, deadbolt too. Still, I didn't feel safe. I grabbed the only thing I could find, one of those heavy meat tenderizer mallets from the kitchen drawer, cold and solid in my hand. Then I waited. Nothing happened. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. I went back upstairs, sat in front of my cousin's bedroom door, and called the cops. They said they were 30 minutes out. I called my dad and uncle. They were even further. No one was close enough, and then I heard it. Glass shattering downstairs. Then, boots, heavy, deliberate, one step at a time, echoing through the house. My heart went still. My cousin whimpered under the covers. I whispered for him to be quiet, to stay hidden. I gripped the meat mallet so tightly my knuckles went white. The footsteps moved through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Then silence. I held my breath. A minute passed, then 2. The sound of those boots again, closer. He was coming up. Every creak felt like a scream. He reached the landing. He opened the first door, my aunt and uncle's room, then the bathroom, then the guest room, but not ours. He stood just outside the door for a moment. I could hear his breathing through the crack, shaky, wet. Then he walked away. The boots thudded back down the stairs, and then the sound of the basement door creaking open. I didn't move. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The ticking clock downstairs, the wind brushing against the siding, the faint hum of the refrigerator. But underneath it all, I swore I could still hear him breathing somewhere below. I kept my eyes on the doorknob, half expecting it to turn, half dreading it wouldn't. My grip tightened on the meat tenderizer until my fingers throbbed. I didn't blink. I barely breathed. And then, finally, red and blue lights washed over the curtains. The police kicked in the front door, yelling commands, but they never found him upstairs. They found him in the basement, hiding in a crawl space, just sitting there in the dark, waiting. Turned out, he was an escapee, a mental patient from a facility one province over. He'd been off-grid for weeks. No one knew how long he'd been watching the house, or why he chose us. The cops said he didn't even flinch when they dragged him out, just kept smiling. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to check that back door, if I hadn't seen him at the window. But what really gets me is that he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at my cousin. My boyfriend and I moved into the duplex in late October. Split level, kind of old, but charming enough. I lived there with my boyfriend, 4 cats, and a foster black lab mix named Toby. From the start, the animals told me something was wrong. The cats never went downstairs. They'd pause at the top of the stairs and stare, not in that bored cat way, but like they were seeing something I couldn't. Sometimes they hissed at the empty stairwell. Toby, usually sweet and fearless, would growl low in his throat if I even tried to take him down there. When I dragged him down for laundry days, he'd tuck his tail and keep low. I told myself it was a daylight basement, street-level windows. Maybe the movement outside spooked them. Maybe it was musty, that's all. Still, even I hated it down there. There was always this strange pressure in the air, like the atmosphere was watching. One day, I was doing laundry, headphones in, trying to drown out the feeling. My boyfriend was upstairs, totally absorbed in some video game, probably hadn't blinked in an hour. I was bending over to throw clothes into the washer when... snap. right next to my ear, like someone stood just behind me and snapped their fingers inches from my head. I ripped the headphones off and spun around. Nothing. Empty basement. No one behind me. I even checked the tiny bathroom, opened every closet door, checked the office. Nothing. When I mentioned it to my boyfriend, he shrugged it off, said maybe it was static or something from the washer. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe. A couple weeks later, he left town to visit his parents in Big City, took 2 of the cats and Toby with him, left early in the morning. It was the first time I was alone in the house, and especially alone downstairs. I was at the old desktop in the downstairs office, printing coupons, early 2000s style. Upstairs was quiet, nothing unusual, until the front door clicked open. I smiled at first, relieved. "Hey, you're back early," I called, pushing my chair back and walking toward the stairs. I expected to see my boyfriend there, flushed from the drive, holding Toby's leash while the dog dragged him inside. I expected annoyed cats and the sound of the door closing behind them, but when I got to the bottom of the stairs, there was no one there. The landing was empty. The front door was still locked. The driveway outside, empty. The road, silent. No tire tracks in the gravel. I froze. I know what a lock sounds like. This wasn't just the door creaking or a draft. It was the sound of a key turning in the lock, then the door opening and closing with a gentle thud, then footsteps on the landing at the top of the stairs. Slow, deliberate, just a few steps. And that feeling, the one I tried to ignore for weeks, surged back full force, heavier than before, like something unseen had entered the house and was standing just out of view, right at the top of the stairs. I called out again. Nothing, just silence. I went upstairs and called my boyfriend. I tried to make my voice sound steady. "Are you home?" He laughed. "What? No, still in Big City. Why?" I told him everything. The sound of the door unlocking, the footsteps, the empty stairs. He was silent for a beat. "I'm heading back now," he said. "Don't go back down there, okay? Stay upstairs until I get home." That part, "don't go back down there," chilled me more than anything else. When he got home, I saw it in his face. He believed me. He didn't say it, but I could see it in the way he checked the windows, how he locked the front door twice, how he didn't argue when I said Toby should never leave the house again. The dog might not speak, but he knew. Whatever was in the lower level, Toby had sensed it all along. From then on, he made sure the dog stayed with me anytime he left, and I never stayed alone in that house again. Eventually, we moved out. I told myself it was just stress, just my imagination. But here's the thing. It's been years, and I've lived in 4 different places since then, and every time I move, the cats eventually start avoiding one room. Toby, now old and slow, still growls at corners. And once, when I was alone doing laundry in our new house, I heard it again. I grew up in a small brick house built in the 1950s. It was one of those modest rural homes you see all over the Southeast. 1,000 square feet at most, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, kitchen, and a living room. The layout was simple, almost boxy. A short hallway ran straight down the middle with bedrooms on either side and the bathroom tucked in. You could stand in the kitchen and see almost the whole place if the doors were open. My parents bought it before I was born, and it never changed much. The paint got touched up, furniture moved around, but it always felt the same. The floor creaked in certain spots, a couple windows leaked drafts, and the hallway always seemed darker than it should be no matter what time of day. I didn't think much about it as a kid. It was just home. The first time something strange happened, I was about 11 or 12. I'd just gotten off the bus after school. It was hot that day, so all I wanted was to get inside and have a shower in the bathroom. I came in through the back door, dropped my school bag, where I always did, and went straight down the hall. I was in the bathroom. That was when I heard it. My name. Not just my name, but my nickname, the one only my family used. And it sounded like my mom's voice, like she was standing just a few feet away in the hallway. For a second, I almost answered, but then I remembered she was at work, and I knew without a doubt that I was alone in the house. The second that thought hit, my whole body went cold. I sat there frozen, convinced a random woman had somehow broken in. I couldn't figure out how anyone would have gotten inside, but that voice was too real to ignore. I showered as quickly as I could, got out, and just stared at the door. When I finally got the nerve to open it, I expected someone to be standing there, but the hallway was empty. I looked left, I looked right. There was nobody. My chest was tight, and my hands were shaking. I didn't even check the rooms. I just bolted out the back door and sat in the yard, waiting for my mom to come home. When she pulled into the driveway, I ran straight to her, told her what I'd heard. She searched the whole house while I stood outside. She found nothing. She told me it must have been my imagination. Maybe I'd been daydreaming. I wanted to believe her, but I knew what I'd heard. I tried to push it out of my mind. Kids scare themselves, right? I thought maybe I was just tired, or maybe it was the pipes or the house settling, and my brain turned it into a voice. That explanation worked for a while, until a couple years later, when it happened again. By then, I was in 7th or 8th grade. It was a weekend, cold and gray outside. My parents were out for the day, and I was completely alone. My brother was older and hardly ever home, always working. I sat at the kitchen table doing homework. The table faced the hallway, so the whole time I could see the shadowy line of doors leading to the bedrooms. I had my book spread out, pencil scratching across the paper. The only sound in the house was me working. The light was dim that day, just enough to see, but not enough to feel cheerful. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how nice it felt to be alone. Then it happened. From the far end of the hallway, I heard it again. My nickname. It was the same exact voice. A woman's voice, almost like my mom, calling to me. It was so clear it cut through the silence like someone was standing 10 feet away. I froze instantly. My whole body knew what it was before my brain did. My stomach dropped, and I felt that same cold rush I remembered from before. I slowly turned my head toward the hallway. It was empty. I didn't even think twice this time. I stacked my books in one motion, grabbed my jacket, and walked out the back door without looking behind me. By the time I stepped into the yard, my eyes were stinging with tears. My heart was racing so fast it hurt. I went to the detached garage, climbed onto my dad's Red Riding mower, and just sat there. I kept my eyes locked on the back door of the house, waiting to see if it would open. I sat there for hours, shivering in the cold. Nobody came out. Of course nobody did. But that didn't calm me. If anything, it made it worse because I knew what I'd heard, and I knew nobody else was supposed to be there. When my parents finally got home, I ran to meet them before they were even out of the car. I told them everything, and they did the same thing as before. Searched the house, found nothing, told me I'd imagined it. I cried that night, not because I thought I was losing it, but because I knew I wasn't. The voice was real, and it had happened twice now in the exact same way. There was no convincing me otherwise. Life went on. I got older, moved out for a while, but eventually came back. My dad passed away several years ago, and now I live in the house again to help take care of my mom. She still says strange things sometimes, little comments that make my skin crawl. She'll be in the kitchen and tell me she heard my dad call her name from the living room. She'll get up, walk in, and find him sitting there watching TV, swearing he never said a word. Or worse, she'll hear him when he's not home at all. She laughs it off, says she must be hearing things, the same way she told me all those years ago. But when she tells me that, I feel sick because I know exactly what she's talking about. It's the same voice I heard as a kid, the one that knew my nickname, the one that called me twice when no one else was home. And whatever it is, it never left that house. This happened about 4 years ago, and it wasn't the first strange thing we've experienced in our house. We'd had a few things before: odd noises, glimpses of figures that looked like someone we knew but weren't. But this was the one that truly scared me. My son was about 2.5 at the time. One night he crawled into bed with my husband and me, which wasn't unusual. He did that often. My husband fell right back asleep, and my son curled up between us. I couldn't get comfortable, and after lying there wide awake for a while, I decided to get up and work on a craft project in my craft room. I was in there for about 45 minutes, maybe a little longer, when the nanny cam monitor suddenly started flickering. We had 2 cameras in the house back then, one in the living room and one in my son's room. They weren't motion sensor cameras, just continuous feed, so the monitor should have been steady. At first I thought maybe the power was glitching, but nothing else in the house was flickering. I got up and walked over to the monitor sitting on the side table. The second I picked it up, it let out this loud, shrieking noise, like a microphone getting hit with sudden feedback. It was sharp and high-pitched, so loud I flinched and dropped it face down on the table. The glow around the edges of the screen lit up the surface, but the flickering had stopped. I hesitated, then slowly picked it back up and turned it over. That's when I froze. On the screen, I saw my son. He was in the living room, standing completely still in the middle of the floor. He wasn't moving, wasn't playing, he wasn't even swaying. He looked like a statue. His body was rigid, his arms hanging by his sides, and he was staring directly at the wall. The sight of him there made my chest tighten. I started toward the door with the monitor still in my hand. As I walked, I glanced back down at the screen, and that's when he moved. Only his head turned while the rest of his body stayed perfectly still. His eyes lifted up and locked directly on the camera mounted in the corner of the living room. He didn't blink. His face had no expression at all, just empty and flat. That look hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't my son's usual curious stare. I hurried through the craft room door, crossed the small kitchen and dining area, and rounded the corner into the living room. I expected to see him standing there like he was on the screen, but the room was empty. My stomach dropped as I quickly went to the bedroom door on the far side of the living room. I opened it, and there he was, lying in the same position he had been when I left, curled up beside my husband. His breathing was slow and steady. He was sound asleep. I looked at my husband, and I asked him if he had gotten up or gone to the bathroom, maybe gone into the kitchen without me noticing, and he said no. I asked if he had seen our son get up, maybe following him without him realizing, but he told me he hadn't moved. He said he'd been lying there the entire time while our son had been sleeping peacefully beside him. I stood there staring at them both, my hands still shaking because I knew what I had seen. I hadn't just glimpsed something out of the corner of my eye. I had been watching the monitor long enough to take in every detail. I saw my son standing there. I saw his head turn. I saw his eyes find the camera. It wasn't quick, it wasn't fleeting, and it wasn't my imagination. We had seen what looked like doppelgangers before, but always so briefly that you didn't really process it until it was over. This wasn't like that. I can still picture it clearly, even now. The way he stood frozen, the empty look on his face, the slow, unnatural movement of his head as it tilted up to meet the camera. For weeks after that, I couldn't look at the monitors the same way. Every time I turned them on, I expected to see something standing there, waiting. Even now, years later, just remembering it makes me cold. One of my closest friends growing up lived in a house that was without a doubt haunted. The place was old, easily around a century by now, and sat in a heavily wooded suburb outside our town. Every member of his family had experiences there. Several of our friends did too, and eventually I had my own. It's impossible to condense it into one story because there were so many accounts, but I'll share the ones I remember best. The first time it happened to me was back in high school. My parents had gone on vacation, so I stayed over at my friend's house for a few nights. Let's call him Paul. I slept in a sleeping bag on the floor of his room while he slept in his bed. One morning, I woke up to someone whispering directly in my ear. Not across the room, not faint, but right in my ear. "You need to leave. Now." It didn't sound threatening, more like a warning, but it startled me awake instantly. My first thought was that Paul was screwing with me. He did that kind of thing all the time. But when I turned my head to the right, he was completely knocked out in his bed. I said, "What?" out loud, expecting him to start laughing, but he didn't move. He was out cold. That's when I realized something that still gives me chills. I heard the whisper in my left ear. Paul was sleeping on my right side. Paul himself had plenty of experiences in that same room. He told me he suffered from constant sleep paralysis when they lived there. He'd wake up and see demons standing in his room. Sometimes the standing fan by his bed would transform into a demon during the paralysis. He'd jolt awake and knock the fan over, convinced something was in there with him. He also claimed he'd see a figure standing in his closet, whether half asleep or wide awake. Oddly enough, once his family eventually moved, his sleep paralysis nearly stopped. The upstairs floor of that house always had a strange feel. That's where Paul, his parents, and two of his sisters slept. It was cramped, shadowy, and had this constant heavy atmosphere. One of his sisters swore she saw a little boy in their bathroom. His mom once opened her own closet to find the same boy standing there, looking up at her, asking for his mom. Hearing that story freaked me out more than anything because it wasn't just the kids seeing things. Adults were too. Before my own experience, I honestly thought Paul exaggerated or made this stuff up. Most of our friends felt the same way, but after that whisper in my ear, I wasn't so quick to dismiss it. Still, part of me wondered if it was a dream, until other friends, people who didn't believe in any of this, had their own encounters. That's when it became clear it wasn't just in Paul's head. One friend was taking care of their dogs while Paul's family was away on their yearly trip. She showed up one evening, fed the dogs in the kitchen, and stood there in the quiet of the empty house. The kitchen led to the dining room, then the entryway, and finally a small living room at the far end. While she was filling the bowls, she suddenly heard a scream come from that living room. Not just a startled yell, a blood-curdling human shriek that ripped through the house like someone was in there with her. She grabbed the dogs and bolted outside. She checked every door and window, convinced someone had broken in, but the house was locked up tight. There was no one there. Shaken, she called Paul to tell him what happened, and his reaction summed up the house perfectly. He just laughed and said, "Yeah, stuff like that happens sometimes." That was it. No shock, no disbelief, no real concern. Just acceptance. Because for them, this was normal. They had lived with it for so long. The voices, the figures, the screams, that it didn't even shake them anymore. But for the rest of us, stepping into that house felt like stepping somewhere you weren't supposed to be.